She sent one last message just after midnight. 3 simple words. On my way. It was supposed to mean safety. It was supposed to mean home. It was supposed to mean the end of an ordinary teenage night. But for 17-year-old Zion Foster, it became the final trace of her existence. By morning, her phone was silent. By afternoon, her family was desperate. And within days, the story everyone thought they understood began to collapse, piece by piece. The cousin she trusted said he hadn't seen her. The police said she was probably a runaway. And the truth would take months to surface. This is not just a story of a disappearance. It's a story about misplaced trust, about lies hidden in plain sight, and about how easily a young life can vanish when no one is truly listening. This is Beyond the Case. On the evening of January 4th, 2022, Zion Foster left her family home in East Point, Michigan. She never returned. What followed was a chain of assumptions by police, by acquaintances, and even by those closest to her that delayed the truth and deepened the tragedy. This documentary examines what happened to Zion Foster, how the investigation unfolded, and why the warning signs were missed until it was far too late. No speculation, no sensationalism, only verified events, documented evidence, and the unanswered questions that remain. Zion Foster was 17 years old. She was the eldest child in a blended family of 6, raised by her mother, Sierra Milton, a woman who worked tirelessly to provide stability for her children. Zion was a senior at East Detroit High School, approaching graduation with the cautious optimism of someone standing on the edge of adulthood. She worked evenings at a local restaurant, the Detroit Wing Company, saving money and talking about independence, about moving out someday, about building a life of her own. Like many teenagers, Zion was navigating the tension between freedom and responsibility. She loved her family, she loved her boyfriend, and she loved spending time with people she trusted, but she also struggled. In the year before her disappearance, Zion had clashed with her mother over rules and boundaries. She had briefly left home on more than one occasion, usually seeking refuge with relatives. Each time she returned, those moments would later be used against her. January 4th began like any other workday. Zion completed her evening shift and returned home shortly before 11 o'clock at night. According to her mother, she asked permission to go out again. She was honest. She said she was meeting up with her favorite cousin, a man named Jalen Brazier. This was not unusual. Zion had mentioned Jalen many times before. She told her mother she spent time with him once or twice a month. Sierra had even seen him pull into the driveway on previous occasions to pick Zion up. Trust had been established. Just before 11 p.m., Sierra watched her daughter walk out the door. That was the last time she would ever see her alive. Later that night, Zion exchanged messages with her boyfriend, Vertez Gonzalez, also a high school student. Just before 1 o'clock in the morning, he received a text from Zion. 3 letters, OMW. On my way. After that, nothing. Her phone stopped responding. Calls went straight to voicemail. Messages were delivered, but never read. At 8:53 that morning, desperate and confused, Vertez sent another message. Are you alive? There was no reply. On the morning of January 5th, Sierra Milton woke up with a growing sense of unease. Zion had never come home. She tried calling her daughter. She tried texting. She waited. Then Vertez reached out, asking the question Sierra had already begun to fear. Had she heard from Zion? That's when Sierra contacted the person her daughter said she'd been with, her cousin, Jalen Brazier. Jalen's response was immediate and shocking. He said he hadn't seen Zion. Not that night, not recently, not even in years. He seemed irritated by the question. He asked Sierra how often Zion claimed to be spending time with him. When she answered once or twice a month, he responded with frustration, saying Zion's lies were sneaky and not safe. According to him, Zion must have been using his name as a cover story. But there was a problem. Zion's phone told a different story. Zion shared her live location with her boyfriend. At 11:24 p.m., on the night she disappeared, her phone placed her directly across the street from Jalen Brazier's home. Vertez, feeling uneasy, took a screenshot of that location. When confronted with it, Jalen doubled down. He sent video footage from his doorbell camera, claiming it showed that Zion never entered his house. He insisted she had not been there. And yet, the story still didn't add up. Sierra went to the East Point Police Department to report her daughter missing. She expected urgency. Instead, she was met with skepticism. Officers focused on Zion's past behavior. They labeled her a runaway. They told Sierra they were not treating the case as an emergency. To them, this was just another teenager who had taken off. To her mother, it was something else entirely. And so Sierra did what many families are forced to do when systems fail. She took matters into her own hands. Flyers went up across the city, social media posts spread, rallies were held, media outlets were contacted. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers joined the search. All the while, Jalen Brazier asked to be left out of it. If you value careful investigation over assumptions, like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Beyond the Case for documentaries that go deeper than the headlines. The contradictions surrounding Zion Foster's disappearance could no longer be ignored. While police initially dismissed the case as another teenage runaway, the people closest to Zion knew something was wrong. Her habits did not match the assumptions being made about her. She was not careless with communication. She always checked in, and she never stayed silent for this long. Behind the scenes, one detail continued to trouble her boyfriend: Zion's phone location. On the night she vanished, Zion had shared her live location with Vertez. It was something they did regularly, not out of control or suspicion, but out of routine. They were young, close, and connected in the way teenagers often are. At 11:24 p.m., her phone placed her across the street from Jalen Brazier's house. That detail mattered. It mattered because Jalen had insisted Zion was never there. It mattered because he claimed they had not spoken in years. And it mattered because technology does not lie out of convenience. Vertez confronted Jalen again, pressing him with the screenshot. Jalen responded by sending footage from his doorbell camera, insisting it showed no sign of Zion entering the home that night. To him, this was proof. To Zion's family, it raised new questions. The footage seemed incomplete. There appeared to be missing segments, gaps in time where recordings should have existed. Sierra Milton noticed it immediately. She had seen Jalen pick Zion up before. She had spoken to him in her own driveway. The idea that they had not spoken in years was impossible, and she knew something else. She had watched her daughter leave the house that night. Zion did not walk away alone. As concern escalated, police were eventually dispatched to Jalen Brazier's home to speak with him directly. At the time, Jalen was 23 years old. He lived with his longtime girlfriend, Katrina Smith, and their 2 young children. When officers arrived, Jalen appeared calm, cooperative, annoyed even. He invited them inside. He repeated his story. He said he had not seen Zion since the previous year. He said Sierra and Zion's boyfriend were exaggerating the situation. He described Zion as someone known to run away, someone who caused unnecessary drama. Officers searched the home. They found nothing. No signs of struggle, no personal belongings, no immediate evidence tying Zion to the residence. To law enforcement, the visit confirmed their initial belief. To Sierra, it confirmed something else entirely. Jalen was lying. Sierra later explained that she had personally interacted with Jalen in recent months. She had hugged him. She had spoken with him face to face when he came to pick Zion up. The claim that they had not spoken in years was not a misunderstanding. It was false. With police unconvinced and time slipping away, Sierra pushed forward on her own. She urged neighbors near Jalen's home to check their security cameras. If Zion had truly been across the street, someone would have captured something. And someone did. Footage from a nearby home showed a white sedan pulling into Jalen Brazier's driveway at approximately 11:15 p.m. on the night Zion disappeared. 2 people exited the vehicle. 1 male, 1 female. They walked into the house together. That detail changed everything. Katrina Smith, Jalen's girlfriend, was working the midnight shift at a manufacturing facility that night. Jalen himself had driven her to work just before 11 p.m. Her phone location data later confirmed she was not home. The woman seen entering the house could not have been Katrina. Investigators would later confirm the identities of the 2 individuals seen on camera: Jalen Brazier and Zion Foster. The footage did not show Zion leaving the house, but it showed something else. On just after 1:40 in the morning, Jalen's vehicle was captured pulling out of the driveway, then backing in so that the trunk faced the backyard. After several minutes, the car drove away. Less than 10 minutes later, it returned. At this point, the narrative of a runaway collapsed entirely. Search warrants were obtained. Jalen's home was searched again, this time with greater scrutiny. His vehicle was impounded. Every item inside was cataloged. Investigators searched for thought fibers, fluids, anything that might explain what had happened. Still, there was no sign of Zion. Then cadaver dogs were brought in. When the dogs were deployed, they alerted strongly at the trunk of Jalen Brazier's car. It was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide investigation. On January 19th, Jalen Brazier voluntarily sat down with detectives. He arrived with a friend who was a lawyer. He was no longer denying contact with Zion. Now, he had a story. He said he had picked Zion up that night and brought her back to his home. He claimed they talked. He claimed they smoked marijuana. He said Zion became sleepy and leaned back on the couch. According to Jalen, he left the room briefly to pour himself a drink. When he returned, Zion was unresponsive. He described checking her pulse. He said it was faint, then gone. He claimed she was no longer breathing, and then he explained what he did next. Instead of calling emergency services, instead of calling her mother, instead of seeking help, he panicked. Jalen told the detectives that he believed calling for help would make it look like he had killed her. He said fear took over. He said he did not know what else to do, so he placed Zion Foster's body into the trunk of his car. He drove to Highland Park, and he placed her body into a dumpster. He described it without emotion. Detectives pressed him on the details. They asked how he knew she was dead. They asked whether she could have still been alive. They asked why he never attempted resuscitation. Jalen insisted she was gone. He said her heart had stopped. He said her breathing had ceased. He said there was nothing he could do. Detectives asked him to lead them to the dumpster. Jalen agreed. But when they arrived, the dumpster was empty. By then, trash from that area had already been collected and transported to landfills. Zion Foster was gone. Cell phone records corroborated parts of Jalen's account. Zion's phone stopped connecting to the network at approximately 1:15 a.m., around the time Jalen claimed she became unresponsive. Jalen's own phone data placed him near the Highland Park dumpsters at approximately 1:48 a.m. But there was another detail investigators uncovered. 2 days after Zion disappeared, Jalen had performed a full factory reset on his phone. Every message, every search, every record, gone. When confronted, he claimed he had not deleted anything important. The evidence suggested otherwise. The next day, Jalen changed his story. Now he claimed that he and Zion had taken acid that night. He suggested that the drug may have caused her heart to stop. Detectives recognized the shift immediately. This was not clarification. It was damage control. When pressed, Jalen could not explain why he had not mentioned the drug earlier. Later still, he would recant that claim as well, saying he only added it because he felt pressured during questioning. His story continued to evolve. The details shifted. The timeline changed. The setting moved from couch to floor, but one thing remained constant. Zion Foster never left that house alive. With no body recovered, prosecutors faced limitations. Jalen Brazier was charged not with murder, but with lying to police. He was sentenced to just under 2 years in prison. Meanwhile, the search for Zion expanded beyond the city. Garbage collection routes were traced. Landfills were identified. An extensive, weeks-long search operation was launched, involving dozens of workers in protective gear, heavy machinery, and volunteers committed to finding even the smallest trace. Nothing was found. While Jalen was incarcerated, his phone calls were monitored. He frequently asked whether anything major had happened, whether the search had turned up anything, whether investigators were still looking. His tone was not one of hope. It was relief. Relief that nothing had been discovered. Relief that Zion had not been found. Relief that the truth remained buried. Jalen Brazier served just over 9 months before being released early. Zion Foster has never been recovered. Her family still waits. And the question remains, one that cannot be erased by lies or time or silence. What truly happened inside that house? And why did it take so long for anyone to listen? If this story matters to you, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Beyond the Case. Because some truths don't end with headlines. They demand to be remembered. The absence of Zion Foster's body became the central obstacle and the quiet shield around which everything else revolved. Without her remains, investigators were forced to rely on what could be proven through behavior, digital records, and the words of the only person known to be with her in her final hours. And those words, spoken by Jalen Brazier, never settled into anything resembling the truth. As the landfill search continued, detectives revisited every assumption they had made in the early days of the case. The initial decision to treat Zion as a runaway now weighed heavily over the investigation. Time had been lost. Evidence that might have existed inside that house. Biological traces, fibers, scents, could have been cleaned or degraded. Surveillance footage that might have been preserved had been overwritten. In missing person cases, the first 48 hours matter. For Zion Foster, those hours slipped away under the wrong narrative. As weeks passed, investigators began reconstructing Zion's final night minute by minute. Her movements, Her messages, her relationships, they spoke with classmates, co-workers, relatives, and friends, building a clearer picture of who Zion was in the days before she disappeared. What emerged did not align with the idea of a girl preparing to vanish. Zion had been planning for the future. She spoke openly about graduation. She talked about getting her own place someday. She worked scheduled shifts and showed up on time. She remained in constant contact with people she cared about. She had not packed belongings. She had not withdrawn money. She had not said goodbye. And she had never cut off communication so abruptly before. The idea that she would simply disappear, without warning, without resources, without contact, did not hold. Investigators also took a closer look at Jalen Brazier's behavior in the days immediately following Zion's disappearance. He had asked to be kept out of it. He had denied knowing where she was. He had expressed irritation at being questioned. But more troubling was what he had done quietly, without explanation. 2 days after Zion vanished, Jalen wiped his phone. A full factory reset. In cases involving sudden deaths or accidents, people often cling to digital memories, messages, photos, call logs that might help explain what happened. They don't erase them. Deleting a phone does not erase guilt, but it does raise intent. When detectives pressed Jalen about why he did not call emergency services, his answers shifted. At first, he claimed panic, then fear, then confusion. Later, he added drugs, then removed them again. But panic alone does not explain methodical steps. He did not call for help. He did not wake his children's mother. He did not contact Zion's family. Instead, he waited. He moved her body. He transported it. He disposed of it. Those actions required time, decisions, and follow-through. They were not reflexive. They were deliberate. The landfill search eventually concluded without recovery. Officials acknowledged publicly what Zion's family already knew, privately, that the chances of finding her were diminishing with each passing day. For Sierra Milton, the pain did not fade with the search's end. It sharpened. She continued to speak publicly, to push for answers, to remind anyone listening that her daughter mattered, that Zion was not a statistic, not a footnote, not a case to be quietly closed. She was a 17-year-old girl who trusted someone she loved, and that trust cost her everything. As the legal process moved forward, Jalen Brazier's sentencing for lying to police drew outrage. Many questioned how a man who admitted to disposing of a teenager's body could serve less than 2 years. But the law is narrow. Without proof of how Zion died, prosecutors were limited. They could punish deception, they could punish obstruction, but they could not yet punish homicide. In recorded jail calls, Jalen spoke frequently with his girlfriend and relatives. The calls were monitored. In them, he did not speak of grief. He did not ask about Zion's family. He did not wonder aloud about what might have saved her. Instead, he asked questions like, "Anything major happened?" "They didn't find nothing, right?" When told there were no developments, he seemed relieved. That relief echoed louder than any confession. If Zion had truly died, suddenly and accidentally, finding her body would have supported his story. Medical examination could have explained what happened. It could have confirmed or contradicted his claims. But finding her would also end his uncertainty. And that was something he did not seem to want. Jalen Brazier was released early after completing a special incarceration program. He returned to life outside prison while Zion Foster remained missing, unrecovered, unresolved. No arrest for murder has been made, no body has been found, and no definitive cause of death has ever been established. Zion's story forces an uncomfortable reality into focus. That danger does not always look like a stranger, that trust can be misplaced, and that systems designed to protect can fail, quietly, bureaucratically, and with irreversible consequences. Her case is not just about what one person did, it is about what everyone else assumed. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and subscribe to Beyond the Case, where we don't rush to conclusions and we don't let the details disappear. Because some cases are not just unsolved, they are unfinished. As the months turned into years, Zion Foster's case settled into a painful limbo, one that families of missing victims know all too well. Officially, the investigation remained open. Practically, it slowed. Leads grew colder. Public attention drifted, but for those closest to Zion, time did not soften anything. It sharpened the absence. Sierra Milton replayed the same questions over and over. What if police had acted faster? What if the house had been treated as a crime scene that first morning? What if the assumption of runaway had never been spoken out loud? These questions had no answers, only consequences. Investigators, too, were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the early handling of the case. Internally, the classification of Zion as a runaway had shaped every decision that followed. When officers believe someone has left voluntarily, urgency fades. Resources are delayed, pressure is reduced, and in Zion's case, that delay allowed a crucial window to close. By the time the evidence began to point clearly toward Jalen Brazier, the opportunity to recover Zion's body from a limited area was already gone. Trash collection schedules had run their course. Landfills had layered weeks of waste over whatever might have remained. Recovery became exponentially more difficult with each passing day. The landfill search itself was unprecedented in scale for a case without a confirmed murder charge. Crews worked long hours, combing through massive sections of waste, driven by the hope that even a fragment could bring clarity. For Zion's family, the search was both a sign of progress and a reminder of how far the case had already slipped. Every day the search continued, Sierra held on to a fragile hope that her daughter would be found, that answers would come, that justice would eventually follow. But as the operation concluded without success, hope gave way to a quieter, heavier determination. Zion would not be forgotten. Public pressure played a significant role in keeping the case alive. Community members, activists, and online audiences continued to ask questions. Why had Jalen's statements changed so many times? Why had he erased his phone? Why did his actions after Zion's death look nothing like panic and everything like concealment? Behavioral analysts who reviewed the case noted a pattern common in deceptive narratives. Jalen's story did not simply evolve, it reacted. Each new claim seemed designed to explain away a specific piece of evidence as it emerged. When location data surfaced, he admitted contact. When toxicology questions arose, he introduced drugs. When pressed further, he removed that detail again. Truth tends to remain stable. Fabrication does not. Another detail drew quiet attention from the investigators and observers alike. Jalen never contacted Zion's family after her disappearance, not to express concern, not to ask if she had been found, not to offer help. His first instinct was distance, his second was denial, and when confronted, his primary fear was not that Zion was gone, but that he would be blamed. For Zion's friends and classmates, the loss was disorienting. A girl they had seen days earlier, laughing, working, planning for graduation, had vanished without explanation. There was no memorial service, no burial, no final goodbye, just a lingering uncertainty that followed them into adulthood. Some described feeling a sense of collective guilt, that they had assumed she would be found, that someone else would handle it, that the truth would surface on its own. It did not. As time passed, legal experts weighed in on the challenges of prosecuting homicide cases without a body. While convictions are possible, they require strong corroborating evidence, confessions, forensic proof, eyewitness accounts, or overwhelming circumstantial consistency. In Zion's case, much of that evidence had been compromised early, yet the case was not closed. Investigators continued to monitor Jalen Brazier's communications and movements. They reviewed old tips. They revisited inconsistencies. They waited, because sometimes cases like this do not break open quickly. Sometimes they wait for a moment when someone talks or slips or decides the burden is too heavy to carry alone. For Sierra Milton, justice was no longer defined by a courtroom outcome alone. Justice meant accountability. It meant acknowledgement. It meant ensuring that Zion's story served as a warning, not just to families, but to institutions. She spoke often about trust, about how easily it can be misplaced, about how predators do not always announce themselves, and about how truly listening to families in crisis can mean the difference between recovery and loss. Zion Foster was 17 years old. She did not choose to disappear. She did not plan to vanish, and she did not deserve to be dismissed. Her final message, "On my way," was not a lie. It was a promise that was never allowed to be fulfilled. Today, her case stands as both a tragedy and a lesson, a reminder that assumptions can be dangerous, that early decisions matter, and that every missing person deserves urgency, regardless of age, background, or past behavior. For beyond the case, Zion Foster's story is not just about what happened on one January night. It is about what happened afterward, about the silence, the delays, and the cost of not acting soon enough. If you believe stories like Zion's deserve to be told with care and seriousness, take a moment to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Beyond the Case, because going beyond the headlines is how we honor the people who never got to come home. And until Zion Foster is found, her story is not over. The case did not end with Jalen Brazier's release. For law enforcement, Zion Foster's disappearance remained an open wound, one that refused to close neatly, no matter how much time passed. Investigators understood something the public often does not. Unresolved cases rarely disappear. They wait. They sit quietly until one new detail shifts the balance. Behind the scenes, detectives continued reviewing everything they had. Old interviews, phone records, surveillance timelines, statements that once seemed insignificant were re-examined for what they might reveal when placed beside one another. 1. Issues stood out more clearly with distance. Jalen Brazier was not just inconsistent, he was selective. He remembered details that protected him. He forgot details that implicated him, and he filled gaps only when pressed. This pattern mattered. In criminal investigations, memory loss often appears at the most inconvenient moments, when clarity would be damaging. Yet Jalen was precise about certain logistics. He remembered routes, he remembered locations, he remembered where he parked, where the dumpster was, and how he approached it. Those were not the memories of someone detached or confused. They were the memories of someone focused. Investigators also took a closer look at the timeline Jalen provided. According to his account, Zion became unresponsive shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning. Her phone disconnected from the network around that same time. His vehicle was captured on camera shortly afterward, repositioned, then driven away. That sequence was tight, too tight for coincidence. It suggested intent forming quickly, almost immediately after something went wrong. Another question continued to surface. Why Zion? Why that night? Why that moment? There was no evidence of a public argument. No record of threats, no messages suggesting fear or hesitation. Zion had trusted Jalen enough to go with him voluntarily. That trust is what made the case particularly difficult to accept for her family. This was not a random act. This was not an opportunistic crime. It happened inside a space that was supposed to be safe. As analysts examined the behavior following Zion's disappearance, they noted something equally troubling: Jalen's repeated framing of himself as the victim. In interviews, he spoke about fear for his own future, his children, his home, his reputation. Zion's death was discussed almost as a complication rather than a loss. Empathy was conspicuously absent. When people experience accidental deaths involving loved ones, they often demonstrate visible grief, shock, guilt, sorrow, disbelief. Even when they panic, their words return again and again to the person they lost. Jalen's words returned to himself. This distinction did not prove murder, but it weakened the credibility of his explanation. The longer Zion's body remained unrecovered, the more the case relied on circumstantial weight. Each piece alone might be explained away. Together, they told a consistent story, one that contradicted Jalen's claims of innocence. Still, the law demands certainty, and certainty is difficult without physical evidence. For Zion's mother, the weight became its own sentence. Every milestone, holidays, birthdays, graduations that never came, served as a reminder that her daughter's life had been interrupted without closure. Sierra continued to speak publicly, not out of anger alone, but out of responsibility. She believed Zion's story could save others, that it could push changes in how missing teenagers are treated, especially young women whose past behavior is used to justify inaction. Runaway labels, she argued, should never cancel urgency, because leaving before does not mean disappearing forever, and independence does not mean consent to harm. Zion Foster's case also reignited discussions around digital evidence. Location data, surveillance cameras, and phone records had all played critical roles, but only after pressure forced them into focus. Advocates pointed out that earlier review of this evidence could have dramatically altered the investigation's trajectory. Technology had spoken early, people had not listened. Over time, the case became a quiet symbol within the community. One reference whenever a missing person report was delayed, whenever assumptions replaced investigation. Zion's name was invoked not just in grief, but in warning. Do not wait. Do not assume. Do not dismiss. For beyond the case, this story does not end with a verdict or a sentence. It ends with a question that still demands an answer. What happens when trust is betrayed and accountability never fully arrives? Until Zion Foster is found, her story remains unfinished, and until systems learn from her case, others remain at risk. Even now, years later, the silence surrounding Zion Foster's final moments continues to speak louder than any explanation offered so far. Silence from the house where she was last seen. Silence from the man who was supposed to protect her. And silence from a system that moved too slowly when speed mattered most. As investigators revisited the case periodically, one truth remained unchanged. Zion Foster did not vanish on her own. Every verified data point placed her trajectory toward one destination, and only one: Jalen Brazier's home. There was no evidence of her leaving that location alive. No camera footage, no witness sightings, no phone activity beyond that final window of time. The digital trail stopped where his story began. And yet, the explanation he provided never reached the standard of belief. One of the most troubling aspects of the case lies not only in what Jalen admitted to doing, but in what he refused to do. He refused to call emergency services. He refused to involve adults who could help. He refused to act in Zion's best interest at the one moment when it mattered most. Instead, he chose secrecy. In doing so, he made a permanent decision on her behalf, one that denied her dignity, denied her family answers, and denied the truth a chance to emerge cleanly. Legal experts have often noted that people who panic after accidental deaths usually seek distance from the body, but not from accountability. They call someone. They ask for help. They make mistakes, but those mistakes are chaotic, emotional, and transparent. What Jalen did was structured. He waited, he moved, he concealed. Those actions unfolded not in seconds, but over time. That distinction continues to haunt the case. Another unanswered question lingers beneath the surface. One investigators have never publicly resolved. What truly happened in that house? Jalen claims Zion suddenly stopped breathing, but no medical explanation has ever supported such a claim. There was no known condition, no documented history, no evidence of an overdose that night. His later mention of drugs appeared only after pressure intensified. And when it no longer served him, that detail vanished as well. Truth does not erase itself. Stories do. For Zion's loved ones, the absence of answers has created a unique kind of grief, one without a body, without certainty, and without closure. They grieve not only the loss of a daughter, a sister, a friend, but the loss of what might have been proven had action come sooner. Birthdays pass quietly. Graduation photos sit unfinished. A future imagined never arrives. And yet, Zion Foster's name continues to circulate, not because the case is solved, but because it is unresolved. Her story has become part of a larger conversation about missing youth, about how quickly narratives are assigned, and about whose lives are treated as urgent. It raises a question that goes far beyond one family. How many cases stall because the wrong assumption is made on day one? How many truths are buried, not in landfills, but beneath doubt, disbelief, and delay? Zion's case reminds us that trust can be exploited, that proximity does not equal safety, and that accountability does not always follow wrongdoing immediately. But it also reminds us of something else. That memory can be powerful, that persistence can matter, and that telling the story accurately, carefully, and without distortion is a form of justice in itself. For beyond the case, this is why stories like Zion Foster's are told, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to preserve truth, to honor victims, and to demand better from the systems meant to protect. If you've stayed with this story, take a moment to like the video, leave a respectful comment, and subscribe to Beyond the Case, because when a voice is taken too soon, remembering becomes a responsibility. And until Zion Foster is found, that responsibility remains with all of us. With time, the case of Zion Foster has taken on a quiet weight, one that does not fade, but settles deeper. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because what remains unsaid is the hardest part. There are moments in investigations where the evidence stops growing, yet the truth feels closer than ever. Zion's case exists in that space. The facts do not contradict one another. They point in the same direction. What is missing is the final confirmation, the physical proof that would transform suspicion into certainty. And that absence has shaped everything. For detectives, the lack of a body means the burden of proof remains unusually high. For the family, it means grief without ritual. No funeral, no finals. Goodbye. No place to visit where mourning feels complete. Zion's mother has spoken openly about what that does to a person, how hope and despair coexist, how every unknown phone call still causes a pause, how every update, no matter how small, still matters. Because as long as Zion has not been found, the story is not finished. The community has not forgotten either. Her name resurfaces whenever a missing child case receives delayed attention, whenever a family is told to wait, whenever a history of teenage rebellion is used to justify inaction. Zion Foster became a reminder of what happens when assumptions override evidence. In hindsight, the warning signs were there early, a final message that promised return. location data that contradicted verbal accounts, surveillance footage that placed her exactly where she said she was going. None of those details fit the runaway narrative, yet that label lingered long enough to matter. And when the truth finally began to emerge, it emerged fractured. Jalen Brazier's admissions created more questions than answers. His words acknowledged involvement without clarity. His actions suggested concealment without explanation. And his shifting accounts eroded confidence in everything he claimed. What remains most disturbing is not just that Zion died, but that the chance to save her, or at least to explain her death truthfully, may have existed. Emergency services were minutes away. Adults were available. Help was possible. Instead, silence was chosen. That decision did not just affect Zion, it rippled outward, through her family, her friends, the investigation, and the years that followed. It turned a tragedy into an unresolved loss. In many true crime cases, the ending comes with a sentence, a verdict, or a confession. Zion's case offers none of those comforts. It ends instead with responsibility. Shared responsibility. Responsibility to listen when families speak. Responsibility to question easy narratives. Responsibility to act quickly when a young life is missing. And responsibility to remember. Zion Foster was not a headline. She was not a statistic. She was a daughter who said she was on her way home. That promise was never fulfilled. If this story stayed with you, if it made you reflect on how fragile trust can be and how vital urgency is, support this work by liking the video, leaving a thoughtful comment, and subscribing to Beyond the Case. Because some cases are not meant to fade quietly. They are meant to change how we respond, so that the next story does not end the same way. What makes Zion Foster's case especially difficult to let go of is that it never reached a natural stopping point. There was no moment where the truth fully surfaced, no moment where all questions were answered, no moment where the system could say, this is what happened and this is why. Instead, the case stopped moving forward while the pain kept moving on. For investigators, this kind of case sits in a quiet category, open but stalled. Files are not closed, leads are not exhausted. They are simply waiting, waiting for new information, waiting for someone to speak, waiting for a mistake, a confession, or a discovery that reopens what time has tried to seal. For Zion's family, waiting is not passive. It is active grief. Every year that passes adds weight to the questions already asked. Every birthday that comes and goes without her adds another reminder of what was taken. Zion would have grown older, she would have graduated, she would have become someone new. Those possibilities were stolen and nothing returned in their place. The hardest part is knowing that answers may still exist, somewhere, not buried in a landfill, not hidden in a phone, but held by someone who knows more than they have ever said. Cases like this often turn on one small shift, a conversation overheard, a moment of guilt, a relationship that changes. Time has a way of loosening secrets that fear once held tightly. That is why investigators do not stop listening and why families do not stop speaking. Zion Foster's story also forces a broader reflection on how society treats missing teenagers. When a young person has ever pushed boundaries, ever argued with parents, ever left home before, those moments can unfairly define them forever, as if growth is impossible, as if people cannot change, as if past behavior excuses present danger. Zion's case shows the cost of that thinking. She was not missing because she wanted to disappear. She was missing because someone failed her. And when institutions hesitated, that failure deepened. For viewers watching this story, there is an uncomfortable takeaway. This could happen in any family. Trust is not rare. Familiarity is not safety. And danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, under the name of someone you already know. That is why cases like Zion Foster's matter beyond their own facts. They shape policy. They shape training. They shape how future reports are handled, if lessons are truly learned. And they shape memory. Because remembering is not passive. Remembering is an act. To remember, Zion is to refuse the idea that time alone can erase responsibility. It is to insist that unanswered questions still deserve attention. And it is to acknowledge that justice is not only about punishment, but about truth. For beyond the case, this is where the story rests for now. Not concluded, not resolved, but documented. Carefully, respectfully, honestly. Zion Foster was 17 years old. She said she was on her way home, and she never arrived. If you believe stories like this deserve patience, depth, and care, take a moment to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Beyond the Case, because some cases don't end. They wait.